Ursula K. Leguin's last story, Dragonfly, in Tales from Earthsea, begins on the island of Way and introducing us to this character who's going to be finding out who she is throughout the entire story, named Dragonfly, eventually going to be given another name by the local witch Rose. And the very first part of the story centers primarily around this act of naming and the conversations that she and Rose are having, which continue on into the second part. But it begins with a, let's call it, family tragedy. There is this very rich land on the island of Way called Irian, and there's a quarrel that we hear about between brothers over the inheritance, dividing them. One heir mismanaged his estate through greed, the other through foolishness. One had a daughter who married a merchant and tried to run her estate from the city. The other had a son whose sons quarreled again, redividing the divided land. By the time that the girl named Dragonfly was born, the domain of Irian, though still one of the loveliest regions of hill and field and meadow, was a battleground of feuds and litigations. Farmlands went to weeds, farmsteads went unroofed, milking sheds stood unused, and shepherds followed their flocks over the mountain to better pastures. The old house that had been the center of the domain was half in ruins on its hill among the oaks, and the owner of this is one of four men who called themselves Master of Irian. The other three called him Master of Old Irian. And this guy has spent all of his money and his energy and his youth in engaging in lawsuits, trying to regain the whole of Irian, unsuccessful. And the only thing that's good that comes out of this is his daughter, Dragonfly. We find out that he'd married a woman who no one at Irian knew anything about. She came from another island, and she never came to Irian. She died in childbirth along the way. When he came home, he had a 3-year-old daughter with him. He turned her over to the housekeeper and forgot about her. Because he's continually captivated by his rancorous, revengeful thoughts about the terrible family that he belongs to and the lawsuits he should have won. And the guy drinks all the time as well. So Dragonfly essentially becomes the mistress of the house, running everything eventually, making sure things are done the way that they're supposed to be, growing up rather wild, untamed, and largely uneducated. And so this is the context. Her father is really a foolish man. And when it comes time for her to get her true name, which in Earthsea is of absolutely central importance, the old vineyard and housekeeper told the master it was time his daughter had her naming day. They asked if they should send for the sorcerer over at Westpool, or would their own village witch do? And then the master falls into a rage. A village witch, a hex hag to give Irian's daughter her true name, or a creeping traitor sorceress servant to those upstart land grabbers who stole Westpool from my grandfather? And so he's going to forbid that she be given her true name from either of these two. And a true name has to come, in general, from some sort of magic user. So a witch, a sorcerer, a wizard, somebody along those lines. So this is going to constitute a serious problem. It's analogous to those parents who, because of whatever's wrong with them, don't allow their children to grow up, to enter into maturity, to move forward into what their body and soul are desiring and needing for them. And so Dragonfly is going to go and talk to Rose. She finds her taking care of a ewe, and they have a little bit of conversation about that. And then she says, "They said you should give me my name." Father fell to raging. "So that's that." The witch said nothing. She knew the girl was right. Once the master of Irian said he would or would not allow a thing, he never changed his mind, priding himself on his intransigence, since in his view only weak men said a thing and then unset it. And here we get into a very interesting conversation that reveals some of what we could call the mechanics of naming in the Earthsea stories. Dragonfly asks Rose, why can't I give myself my own true name? And Rose says, well, it can't be done. Well, why not? Does it have to be a witch or a sorcerer? What do you do? And Rose says, well, you need to know something about the power, see? And, Dragonfly says, well, what power? And Rose says, the one. And then Dragonfly says, well, you said that I had power, so why can't I name myself, right? And then Rose is going to make an important distinction. I said you have a strength in you, a great one, and you know it too. What you are to do, I don't know, nor do you. That's to find. But there's no such power as to name yourself. And then Dragonfly says, well, why not? What is more you than your own true name? Why can't you give yourself your name? And Rose doesn't really have an answer to that. And eventually, she's going to sort of wear her down. But there's another important thing here. A name is not just something assigned to one. It is a gift. So she says, my name's myself. This is the witch. True, but what's a name then? It's what another calls me. If there was no other, only me, what would I want a name for? But, Dragonfly said, and stopped, caught by the argument. After a while, she said, so a name has to be a gift. Rose nodded. Give me my name, Rose, the girl said. Your dad says not. I say to. He's the master here. And then she says, he can keep me poor and stupid and worthless, but he can't keep me nameless. And so Rose says, all right, we'll do that. And then there's a little bit more discussion about, well, how do you actually figure out what the name ought to be? Is this a discursive process of sort of thinking it through? And so Dragonfly is going to say, how do you know what name to say, Rose? Does the water tell you? And the witch shook her head. I can't tell you. Her can't didn't mean won't. Dragonfly waited. It's the power, like I said. It comes just so. You're there in the water together, you and the child. You take away the child name. People may go on using that name for a use name, but it's not her name, nor ever was. So she's not a child, and, for that moment, has no name. Then you wait in the water there. You open your mind up, like opening the doors of a house to the wind. So it comes, your tongue speaks it, the name, your breath makes it. You give it to that child, the breath, the name. You can't think of it. You let it come to you. It must come through you, and the water to her it belongs to. That's the power. That's the way it works. It's all like that. It's not a thing you do. You have to know how to let it do. That's all the mastery. And then a very interesting observation here. Dragonfly says, well, mages can do more than that. And Rose, who's actually very deferential to these mages, as are so many witches and sorcerers, says nobody can do more than that. Why? Because it's something else happening through the seeming doer, right? The doer is the namer, but the name is not coming from the namer. The name is coming to the child, now named into adulthood, from this power which the namer is merely a channel for. Now, what is the name that Rose is going to give to her in this secret ceremony? Well, we hear it. Woman, be named, in a whisper, the witch said. You are Irian. Now, that provokes a reaction, and not a happy reaction by any means, right? Dragonfly spoke in a ragged, raging whisper. How could you name me that? Now, why is she so upset? Well, she tells you, Irian is from Iria, right? She says, it isn't right. It isn't my true name. You did it wrong. It's his name, her father's name. He can have it. He's so proud of it. His stupid domain, his stupid grandfather. I won't have it. I don't want it. It isn't me. Now, what's going on there? Well, part of what she expresses is not knowing who she is still. Getting your name is supposed to be this intimate gift that tells you who and what you actually are. And in Dragonfly, now Irian's case, she says, "This isn't my true name. I thought my name would make me be me. I still don't know who I am. I'm not Irian." The witch says, "It came so." And Dragonfly, Irian, actually tells the witch, "If you tell it to anyone, I'll kill you." And the witch says, "You're going to kill me? I don't want to tell anybody that I named you to begin with, right? I was disobeying your father, and now you're going to kill me, huh?" And she says, "Well, I feel," this is Irian, "I feel like you betrayed me. You did something wrong." And the witch says, "I spoke your true name. It's not what I thought it would be, and I don't feel easy about it." And now here's another very important part, foreshadowing what else is going on in the rest of the story. There's something that's not quite done. She says, I don't feel easy about it, as if I'd left something unfinished, but it is your name. If it betrays you, that's the truth of it." And then Rose does something quite extraordinary. She says, "If you feel betrayed and you want to betray me in response, I'm going to make myself vulnerable to you. I'm going to tell you what my own true name is, Ataudis." And so she gives that to her. And that gesture produces a kind of reconciliation. Here's the description. "Dragonfly put out her groping hand and met the witch's hand. They put their arms round each other in a fierce, long embrace. Then they hurried on, the witch to her hut near the village, the heiress of Iria, up to the hill to her ruinous house." So there is also a further conversation in the second chapter called Ivory, and it's essentially provoked by this guy, Ivory, who's not quite a wizard, as we're going to find out, but is passing himself off as if he's practically a wizard, right? So there are these continued conversations about Ivory, about mages, and Roke. And so Rose tells her, "The man's a wizard, or nearly, a Roke wizard. You must not ask him questions." She was more than scandalized. She was frightened. Now that's an important line. Rose, like so many village witches and even sorcerers, is deferential to the wizards, to the men of Roke, to the mages who come from this island. It's not merely a matter of social convention, it's also a matter of fear that has been inculcated in them. So what's going on here? Rose is going to caution Dragonfly. Dragonfly is going to tell Rose, in contrast, what she's actually learning from Ivory, which has to do with, well, how do you actually get into Roke? What goes on there? And Rose is scared, but she also wants to know what's happening there, right? So the witch listened, unable to resist the lure of secrets revealed and the contagion of passionate desire. There's these little revelations, and then go on, the witch murmured, right? So Dragonfly says, "To hear about the great house is wonderful, but I thought the people there would be, I don't know." And they have this discussion about power. She says, "Of course they're mostly boys when they go there, but I thought they'd be, some of them are really bad and stupid. They get into the school because they're rich, and they study there just to get richer or to get power." And then Rose says, "Well, of course they do. That's what they're there for." And then Dragonfly says, "But power, like you told me about, this isn't the same as making people that do what you want or pay you." And Rose says, "Isn't it? If a word can heal, a word can wound. If a hand can kill, a hand can cure. It's a poor cart that goes only one direction." And then Dragonfly, or Irian, says, "But on Roke they learn to use power well, not for harm, but for gain." And then Rose contrasts that and says, "Everything for gain, some way I'd say people have to live. But what do I know? I make my living doing what I know how to do, but I don't meddle with the great arts, the perilous crafts like summoning the dead." And then Dragonfly says something very interesting. everything's perilous. Everything has got its own danger to it. And there's a contrast here between sort of keeping your head down, just doing your thing, that will keep you safe, as opposed to going out into the wider world where things are dangerous, where you don't know what's going to happen. But you do know that there's going to be rivalry and people who don't like you invading, as you might say, their place. Rose watched her, it continues. She knew she did not know who Irian was or what she might be. A big, strong, awkward, ignorant, innocent, angry woman, yes. But ever since Irian was a child, Rose had seen something more in her, something beyond what she was. And when Irian looked away from the world like that, she seemed to enter that place or time or being beyond herself utterly, beyond Rose's knowledge. Then Rose feared her and feared for her. And then Rose says to her, "You take care, everything's perilous right enough, and meddling with wizards most of all." And then this closes in a very interesting way. Through love, respect, and trust, Dragonfly would never disregard a warning from Rose, but she was unable to see Ivory as perilous. She didn't understand him, but the idea of fearing him personally was not one she could keep in mind. She tried to be respectful, but it was impossible, right? So she might think that there could be some peril on Roke, but not from this young would-be wizard who she has encountered, and she and Rose are engaged in discussing all the things that Ivory is telling Dragonfly / Irian about that. So there's this very interesting relationship that we see narrated here on the Isle of Way between Dragonfly / Irian and Rose / Atautis about the nature of names and magic.